Good evening. My question is that oil companies have dramatically reduced investment and jobs are now currently being lost. I see the devastating impact firsthand through my work. I just want to ask, why are we destroying an industry that employs over 200,000 people only to import fossil fuels at higher total emissions?
Thank you, Cameron. UK government is looking again at the approval process for Rosebank and Jackdaw as well, following new environmental assessments. Lorna Slater.
So I'm an electromechanical engineer, and until I was elected, I worked in renewable energy here in Scotland. All of us can see around us, from the wildfires in Los Angeles to the terrible floods in Spain to the floods we've had in Scotland, farms being damaged, businesses and homes being damaged. The climate crisis is real, it's here, it's now. You'll know yourselves that oil and gas has been in decline for at least a decade. You will have seen the challenges that's had, workers having to leave that industry, the industry constricting as the basins in Scotland decline, and it becomes more and more expensive to pull that oil out.
But we're going to need it until 2050. The UK Climate Change Committee tell us that.
So there's a difference between finishing up extracting from the existing basins and opening up new ones. So that is indeed what needs to happen, is that those basins, as they decline and finish up, then we phase out and we pivot. And you know yourselves how urgent it is that we pivot to that new investment in renewable energy, of which Scotland has an enormous amount. The Scottish Government's draft energy strategy lays out exactly how much energy we need and how many jobs we need to create for that. The challenge at the moment is getting enough engineers and technical people into renewable energy, because the jobs and opportunities are absolutely there.
But Cameron says jobs are being lost right now because
they have been for more than a decade. Oil and gas in Scotland has been in decline. So this isn't a new thing. This isn't something that's going to happen. It's something that has been happening. And the longer we pretend that oil and gas can continue forever, the more difficult it is to grasp the nettle and say, guys, this is in decline.
So what's your message to Cameron? He asked you the question. Look at him in the eye and tell him, what's your message to him tonight? The message is
oil and gas must decline. We are in a climate emergency. That means the existing basins must be phased out and new investment made in other decarbonised sources of energy.
Okay, what do you think about that?
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank Lorna for her considered response. However, what I'd like to communicate to you is that we're not talking about 20 years, 10 years, 30 years down the line. Jobs are being lost now as a result of the decisions that are being made, I'm sorry to say, Michael, by the UK government. I work in a company in the energy sector in Aberdeen. We have many suppliers working for us. We buy many things from across the industry, from many companies in Aberdeen and beyond, throughout the supply chain, logistics contractors, a lot. What we're seeing now, due to a decline in activity, we're losing contracts, and we're now looking like it might be possible that we'll have to reduce our workforce as well. This is not unique to my company. These effects have not been going on for 10 years. They've been going on for the past 1 year. Last year, we had a full order book, and the year before, flat out busy. Ever since the new budget has come in, all we've been doing, Michael, I'm not lying to you, all we've been doing is losing work.
So you're not transitioning? You're not part of this transition we keep hearing about?
We are transitioning as much as we can. And we have interest in decommissioning. We work in decommissioning, production, enhancement, well intervention. And what we're seeing from the operators is a vast reduction in investment today, and resulting in job losses today.
Right.
And I want to communicate that to you.
Michael Shanks, you have a go.
Well, I think I'd say two things in response to you, Cameron. First of all, oil and gas will play an incredibly important part in our energy and our economy for many, many years to come. And we're not seeking to speed up the decline in the North Sea. What we are seeking to do is give clarity to what comes next, because the truth is the North Sea is a declining basin. It's been declining for a decade or more, and it would be irresponsible for us not to think about what comes next. Now, the important thing for me is that we have, yes, a decline in oil and gas, which there has been already. More than a third of jobs have been lost in the past 10 years. This didn't arrive with a Labour government last year. More than 70,000 jobs have already gone from the industry. So that decline has to be matched with an incline in what comes next. And the truth is, either we sort of pretend that this can carry on as it has been, without taking any decisive action, or we have to work out what comes next.
Your colleague Brian Leishman says that Grangemouth is the very definition of an unjust transition at the moment. Isn't that the first test of that? And isn't that a warning to people here of what's coming their way?
I think it's a really important example of what happens when you don't start to plan for the future. And look, I came into this job 7 months ago. The very first thing in my entry as Minister for Energy was Grangemouth. That wasn't an issue that arose in July last year. We've known about Grangemouth for more than 2 years, more than 10 years actually. It's been precarious, but certainly Petroenios announced that they were likely to close it 2 years ago.
But you've known about the decline in North Sea oil as well for years. What's happening there?
Well, we haven't been in government, Stephen, is the point. And what we're trying to do is give clarity to the future. Well, we do. And that's what we're doing about giving clarity to the future of the industry, saying, first of all, we'll not issue new licenses to explore new fields. That doesn't mean an end to oil and gas in the North Sea, because the consenting issue around projects in already licensed field is quite separate. But it does mean we have to grapple with what the future looks like and not pretend that this transition isn't already underway, because too many people have already lost their jobs. We want to make sure we're building what comes next.
I want to hear from just some other people in the audience. Man in the blue shirt here, yes.
Yeah, you're saying that the oil and gas is declining. Obviously, today I heard in the news as well that BP is going to be selling off its wind interests in the UK and selling it to a Japanese company. So I'm just wondering what the politicians think of hearing that news, that BP will be basically looking at its core industry, which is oil and gas.
Thank you, thank you. Lady in the middle here, yes.
I would like to know exactly what GB Energy is all about and how that's going to impact on Aberdeen and the rest of the country.
Very good question.
Come on, Michael.
It's a really good question. So we announced that GB Energy will be headquartered in Aberdeen, which is based on the fact that Aberdeen does have more than 60 years of tremendous energy experience and expertise that we want to bring into what comes next. It's 8.3 billion of investment. And the crucial thing about GB Energy is it's about investing in the renewables projects, but also in the supply chains and all the jobs that come behind it. Because 80% of jobs in this city in oil and gas are not directly on platforms in the North Sea, they're in the supply chains. And we want to make absolutely sure that we're protecting those jobs.
And the jobs with GB Energy won't come for 20 years, we're being told.
No, well, I don't think that's right at all. What we've said is, of course, the headquarters of GB Energy will have 200 or 300 people. We're already recruiting. The bill has to finish its passage through Parliament before we can actually set that up. But the whole point about GB Energy is investing in the supply chains. Those aren't going to be sitting in an office in GB Energy, but they will be in companies right across the city and across the UK, delivering the manufacturing for the renewable future that we should have had in this country for the past decade, but we haven't.
Jeff Aberdeen, the SNP's position, the presumption against new exploration, do you understand what their position is at the moment on oil and gas?
No, I don't. And frankly, and I've said this publicly before, the SNP's position on a presumption against oil and gas is tokenistic and is virtue signalling for any other reasons, but main one being that they don't have responsibility for oil and gas licensing. So it's a silly position for them to put themselves in for a number of reasons. But please, if you permit me, I think it's really important that we don't characterise this debate as choosing the economy over the climate. I'm fed up of that narrative being pursued. In this city, within 100 miles of where we're sitting tonight, there are 22 offshore wind projects, ScotWind, Intog. They could be transformational for the green energy industry and for the city and region. Of those 22 projects, only one has consent just now. Now, the good news for us all in Aberdeen is that that project has chosen to put its headquarters right here in the city. So that's the shape of things to come. That's encouraging, and we should welcome that. But sadly, all of those projects, including the one that's got consent, there is not a gram of steel in the North Sea just now. This is going to take time. This is going to take generations to build. They need to get through consenting, CFD process. They need to get supply chain orders in there. There's lots of things that have to happen. This will take up to 30 years to get this stuff moving. So what do we do in the meantime? Well, Lorna, your point on the climate emergency is well made. But we are relying, ONS tells us in 2023, on 80 billion pounds of imports in fuels. Oil, gas, some coal, and electricity. Imports are not particularly good for our country for two reasons. One, we don't get the economic activity. We don't get the jobs. We don't have the balance of payments benefits. We don't have economic growth, which was something that we really desperately need in this country. But secondly, and most importantly, to your point, and I have to address this, is that we're using LNG, gas largely from Norway. When we can't use Norway, who are usually supplying the European continent post-Ukraine-Russia conflict, we're using the US and Qatar. Now that's LNG, liquid natural gas. That is 4 times more carbon intensive than our domestic supply. We have all the tools at our disposal right here in this region. 1,000 energy supply chain companies ready to go for the green industrialisation of our country. If they don't have any profits from oil and gas, they won't be sustained until this wonderful opportunity in renewables is made available. Stop the virtue signaling and be more pragmatic about what could be the biggest economic opportunity in our
Lorna,
country's
Fergus Ewing, your old nemesis on many things, says that you're Donald Trump's little helpers on this because we're going to end up buying it from either Norway or America.
So the difference about looking at what's in the North Sea, that isn't reserved for Scotland. There is no publicly owned energy company that's going to dig that up and keep it for us to use. It's dug up by commercial companies, whether that is BP or Japanese firms or other firms. That is dug up by commercial companies and sold on the open global market. It isn't reserved for Scotland. We currently have a mix of imports and exports of gas and oil because it just depends on what's happening with the global market and what is the condition of current contracts. So keeping the North Sea going, which is an increasingly expensive basin to extract, is going to be uncompetitive globally anyway, even if we keep that going.
What's the answer? We have more imports. How much is how many imports? 80, 100
the
million,
answer is
120
twofold.
million? All that money could be being spent on renewables.
The answer
Surely
is
that's
twofold.
the answer.
The answer is twofold. One is to urgently reduce our energy needs by upgrading our homes and heats and buildings so that we don't need so much energy.
That's a long-term aspiration.
It can happen quite quickly. Sweden did theirs quite quickly. That could happen within a decade, upgrading our homes in Scotland. The other piece of that is, of course, the transition to renewables very, very quickly. Yes, absolutely. The existing oil basin will go on for years. There is a draft plan for this, the Scotland's energy strategy. We're waiting very urgently for the Scottish government to bring the final one.
But why should Norway make money out of this and not us?
Because nobody makes money. Nobody makes money on a dead planet. All the countries in the world got together to agree the Paris Agreement to reduce fossil fuel emissions by 45%. Each nation in the world, I think I read this week, has effectively reduced by 3% because there's this idea that, we can keep doing it, but everyone else doing it is bad. No, we all have to meet our obligations under the Paris Agreement.
Just
all
briefly,
of our futures
Jeff. Okay, Lorna, hang on a
second.
Jeff.
Very quickly, sorry. I think Lorna makes an important point about global leadership and showing global leadership on the world stage. Global leadership is not shirking our responsibility and saying we'll stop here and offshore the emissions to other countries that are producing. Global leadership is being an oil and gas producing country, sustaining the supply chain base, creating a new renewables industry and saying to the world, we managed to do it and we sustained employment. That is global leadership.
Okay. We have got many people in the audience who work in the energy sector, I know, this evening. Gentleman with the glasses here. Yes.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that it can be quite confusing at times that you see the government one day are running and signing up the climate agreement, then the next day they're running to open up new licenses for new exploration, and then they're going back and they're ripping up the climate agreement, and then they're going back and it's going to court over the new. It's very confusing.
Mixed messaging.
Is the government, what is their plan? It seems that they're just out of control, trying to keep everyone happy and not actually having a clear vision.
Thank you.
Correct.
Man with the beard, just behind you. Yes, on you go.
You mentioned there about upgrading homes, and I'm just wondering who pays for that. A pensioner in an old house that's already lost.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Lorna. I just want to get some more views from the audience. Man at the back.
I believe that the energy capacity for renewables in Scotland is 106% of what we need. So if we are pulling energy in, where are you putting the other energy?
Jeff,
are we building farms for...
that's electricity, I think we're talking about here, isn't it?
I think it's just really important to understand that that's electricity equivalent. So that's really important when the wind blows because it's intermittent, but when the wind doesn't blow and we have very cold days, sorry, very quickly, but then we rely on gas for our base load. But the other point is that doesn't include heat and transport. So 85% of British homes are still gas powered. 1.5 million Scottish cars are still petrol, 1.3 are diesel. So there is still a requirement there for a bigger energy mix.
All right. Jeff says he doesn't understand the SNP's position on this presumption against oil and gas. Do you want to explain it for us clearly for everyone here tonight?
I mean, every new licence should be looked at robustly, should be looked at actually in terms of climate compatibility, should be looked at in terms of the benefits and the takeaways. But I mean,
what about in terms of jobs?
I think in terms of the key point around jobs, I absolutely think the UK government's got it wrong. I think the windfall tax is exactly what is causing the problems. I think you're completely right. That massive acceleration that there is, you're seeing a huge number of companies that are saying, well, it's not worth carrying on in the North Sea. And there's like a seesaw here, right? We know that in future, no matter what we do, no matter how much drilling we do, the oil and gas is going to run out, right? Some point in the future, well into the future, that's going to happen. We need to make sure that we're increasing those renewable jobs before we're taking down those oil and gas jobs. My biggest concern is that the oil and gas workforce is massively mobile, right? Folk are going offshore, folk are going away to Dubai for 6 months at a time. They're spending an awful lot of time going around the world. They're a very, very mobile, highly skilled workforce. If oil and gas goes down too quickly before these other jobs go up, we'll lose that workforce.
But it's not helped by the mixed messaging that man was talking about.
No,
there.
it's not. It's not helped by the mixed messaging. I think, in terms of the windfall stuff, right? Labour have got this wrong because they're doing it too quickly.
Yeah, but what about the SNP? What about the SNP in this
policy? The windfall tax was introduced by the Conservatives.
And you've backed it, right?
Yeah.
And continue doing it. But why? You know what? The problem is Westminster, right? The problem wasn't the Tories. The problem isn't Labour. The problem is Westminster in general.
Nicola Sturgeon says there's a presumption against any new oil and gas exploration. Do you still go along with that?
The position is that everything should go through a robust assessment of whether or not actually. And we've had a new court case, so there does require to be other assessments. But what we need to do is what I would expect Labour to do, and I'm frankly bamboozled that they're not, is focus on jobs. Focus on jobs, and they're not doing that. We're ending up in a situation where we're going to lose jobs in Aberdeen.
Michael, let's just be really clear. We are focusing on jobs. And the one particular investment in 8.3 billion in Great British Energy, the SNP failed to support. Although, interestingly, on many of these topics, licensing seems to be another one. Your colleagues in Holyrood take a very different view, where the SNP support it in Edinburgh, but you don't support it at Westminster.
You had a £28 billion green pledge that you turned your back on, and now it's £8 billion is going into GB Energy.
You don't support that in Aberdeen.
Only £8 billion is
jobs in this city that you don't support.
SSE alone has got more than £50 billion of stuff in the pipeline. What good do you think £8 billion is going to do?